It starts with a sound most people would mistake for rain. A faint clicking in the air, like tiny metal seeds scattering across the sky. Then, a sudden silence. Too quiet, too still, before the ground erupts in a chain of explosions that don't come all at once, but in waves. Some go off immediately. Others wait. Minutes, hours, days, even years. And that's what makes cluster bombs so terrifying. Because unlike a single explosion that ends in a moment, a cluster bomb turns an entire area into a ticking time bomb. The idea behind cluster bombs, at least from a military perspective, sounds brutally efficient. Instead of dropping one large bomb on a single target, a cluster bomb opens mid-air and releases dozens, sometimes hundreds of smaller explosives called submunitions or bomblets. These spread over a wide area, designed to hit multiple targets at once: vehicles, buildings, soldiers, anything in the vicinity. On paper, it's about coverage, maximum damage, maximum reach. But reality is far messier and far more dangerous. Because these bomblets don't choose what they hit. They don't distinguish between a soldier and a child, between a tank and a home, between a battlefield and a playground. Once released, they scatter unpredictably, drifting with the wind, bouncing off surfaces, landing in fields, streets, rooftops, and gardens. And not all of them explode when they land. That's where the real danger begins. Imagine walking through your village days after a conflict is ended. The fighting is over. The planes are gone. Life, slowly, is returning to normal. But hidden beneath the dust and grass are dozens of unexploded bomblets. Small, often colorful, sometimes shaped in ways that catch the eye, like a toy or a can or a ball. To a child, they can look harmless, even interesting. One touch is enough. This is why cluster bombs are considered one of the most dangerous weapons ever used in modern warfare, not just because of what they do in the moment, but because of what they leave behind. A single cluster bomb can contaminate an area the size of several football fields. Multiply that by hundreds or thousands used in a conflict, and entire regions become unsafe. Farmers can't farm their land. Children can't play outside. Families can't rebuild their homes, because the war doesn't really end. It just changes form. One of the most devastating aspects of cluster bombs is their failure rate. Even under ideal conditions, a significant percentage of bomblets fail to detonate on impact. Depending on the type and conditions, this can range from 5% to as high as 40% or more. That means if a bomb releases 100 submunitions, dozens might remain unexploded. Each one becomes a hidden mine. But unlike traditional landmines, which are often placed deliberately and mapped, at least in theory, cluster bomblets are scattered randomly. There's no clear pattern, no reliable map. They can be anywhere. In trees, in rivers, in rooftops, in gardens. Waiting. The danger isn't just physical, it's psychological. Imagine living in a place where every step could be your last, where children are told not to pick up anything unfamiliar, not to wander off paths, not to explore, where a simple walk to school becomes a risk, where the ground itself feels like an enemy. That kind of fear doesn't disappear overnight. It lingers for years, shaping entire generations. Historically, cluster bombs have been used in multiple conflicts around the world. In places like Laos, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and others, their impact has lasted long after the wars themselves ended. In Laos, for example, millions of unexploded bomblets still remain decades after they were dropped. Entire communities live with the constant threat, and people are still being injured or killed today by weapons that fell before they were even born. Think about that for a moment. a weapon dropped in the past, still claiming lives in the present. This long-term danger is one of the main reasons why much of the international community has pushed to ban cluster bombs altogether. In 2008, the Convention on Cluster Munitions was introduced. This treaty prohibits the use, production, transfer, and stockpiling of cluster munitions. Over 100 countries have joined. They recognize that the humanitarian cost, the risk to civilians, especially children, was simply too high. But not all countries have signed the treaty, and that means the threat hasn't disappeared. Supporters of cluster bombs often argue that they have military value. They can disable large areas quickly, disrupt enemy movements, and provide strategic advantages in certain situations. And from a purely tactical standpoint, that may be true. But the problem is that their impact doesn't stop when the battle ends. Most weapons are designed for immediate effect. Once used, their role is over. Cluster bombs are different. They extend the battlefield into the future. They turn peace into uncertainty. There's also the issue of precision. Modern warfare increasingly emphasizes accuracy, targeted strikes designed to minimize collateral damage. Cluster bombs go in the opposite direction. They are area weapons, meaning they are designed to affect everything within a broad zone. In densely populated areas, that becomes incredibly dangerous. Homes, hospitals, schools, nothing is spared simply because it shouldn't be a target. And then there's the human cost. Behind every statistic is a story. A farmer who steps on an unexploded bomblet while working his land. A child who picks one up out of curiosity. A family that returns home after a conflict only to find that their house and everything around it is unsafe. These aren't rare incidents. They are the predictable consequences of how these weapons work. Even the cleanup process is slow, expensive, and dangerous. Specialized teams have to search for and safely remove unexploded bomblets one by one. It can take years, sometimes decades, to clear a single region. And during that time, people are still at risk. Entire economies can be affected. Agriculture suffers, development stalls, communities remain trapped in a cycle of danger and recovery. What makes cluster bombs especially troubling is that their effects are indiscriminate by design and persistent by nature. They don't just strike, they linger. They don't just destroy, they deny. They don't just end lives in an instant. They continue to threaten lives long after the conflict fades from the headlines. In a world where technology is advancing rapidly, where precision and control are becoming more achievable than ever before, cluster bombs stand out as a reminder of a different kind of warfare, one that prioritizes coverage over caution and immediate impact over long-term safety. That's why so many voices, from humanitarian organizations to survivors, have called for their complete elimination, not just because of what they do in war, but because of what they do after. Because long after the planes have left the sky, long after the explosions have stopped echoing, long after the world has moved on to the next headline, cluster bombs remain, silent, hidden, waiting. And that is what makes them truly dangerous.